If I have my cognitive twin, how can I use it? Will it make decisions for me?
15 years ago, they'd spent time collecting all the recordings of Holocaust survivors. And you could ask about the Holocaust and you could interact. And that's doable today. Trust me, that'll scare you to sit down opposite that and have it answer your own question.
That would be worth how much money to... The dark side, though, I think, to all this is like, who owns that?
Andy, welcome to Decisions That Count.
Oh, wonderful. Thanks for having us.
We've been trying to get you on the show. This is super exciting for us.
Yes, yeah. Been a little busy. It's good.
So the first question, what is a cognitive twin?
So a cognitive twin is the sort of, the cognitive representation of a human brain. That's the postulation. That's the promise. A digital twin is an old concept. Started probably in aerospace, or was popularized in aerospace, where Boeing or Lockheed, GE would make a digital twin of an engine. They'd replicate the precision of the engine down to the finest detail on computer, and then that allowed them to run tests, test hypothesis on a laptop or a server on the digital twin of the engine, and run it for thousands and thousands of hours. And that would allow them then to predict things, measure fatigue in the engine, look at problems that may arise. Once they were happy with the digital version, they would then obviously run out to the shop and build it. The cognitive twin is a sort of a cognitive version of that. It's a accurate as we can possibly make representation of the human mind, and at the sort of mechanical level at this stage, but it's sort of the promise is it becomes a full cognitive twin that allows you to proxy yourself, if you like, on your decision making and emotions and other things, as you can imagine.
Would it be conscious?
You went right to the hard question. I can see that. There will be an argument to be had. I think when you get down to the sort of complexity of the human brain, right to the very sort of basic biology of it, it's the most complex single entity in the known universe. So the number of neurons in the brain exceed the number of stars in the known galaxy. So when you start to think about what really occurs at the conscious, subconscious level, body, mind, spirit kind of thing, you're not really, I think, we're not in a position to answer that yet. I think it'll probably depend on how you define consciousness. I think at the fundamental level of operation of the human brain right now, the conversation seems to be circling around some sort of quantum level operation, and we barely know that outside of the brain, let alone in the brain. So I think it'll probably take a quantum platform, like a really functioning quantum computer, to maybe replicate the true interactions of a human brain, and that is when maybe ask that question then. I'm not smart enough. I don't know if I'll be around long enough to answer it. But yeah, it's a great question.
Well, how will the cognitive twin work? So if I have my cognitive twin, how can I use it? Will it make decisions for me? Like how can I use it?
Biomechanical twin right now is very possible. We can take a really very, very accurate picture of you. We can map your sort of the underlying skeletal structures. We can even predict muscular structures, and we can kind of create that version of you. See the skeleton working with all the muscles on the digital, and that can be very accurately tracked to your personal sort of biomechanics. Matches everything you do, watches how you walk, can replicate everything down to a very, very, very high level of precision. That's our best digital twin, is a biomechanical digital twin. And that, even the research right now is profound. Like they can look at a twin, but even use the twin to look at you, and even small changes in gait, because I know we're about the brain. They're looking at very early predictions in subtle shifts in how you walk, predict onset of cognitive decline, Alzheimer's and other things. So there's triggers for the brain. So there's these sort of secondary inputs or third version inputs of your brain that is manifested in how you move. And so they can measure that. So that's sort of indirectly.
Can they even do like disease states? So like how MS or something would affect
so they're doing right now, they're tracking a lot of data. They're mapping that in terms of a biomechanical twin, if you like, or a biomechanical model. Is even better to think of it that way. And then that model, they can look at shifts. So you can imagine very significant shifts. So obviously you can see, because the hands, the tremor may be from some motor neuron disease, but they can get it so early because the machine can see so accurately and can cross-reference you to yourself. So that's a great use case for some of these models, is to say, all right, this is what you look like, and we've seen this slight pattern. And that pattern can be indicative way before you can even diagnose it with some of these other tests. To go a step further, the disease itself, the next level up, if you want to sort of stagger them, would be your biological twin. So all the biological systems, all the biological pathways, and a lot of those are driven from a genetic baseline, genetics, epigenetics. And the more you can then layer that on top of your biomechanical twin. So you take your biomechanical twin, then you layer in your genetic information, your sort of biological systems information, and they're just starting to map that out. They're really starting, and I'm part of a company actually that's involved in that sort of model, sort of a biological systems model. So with that, they're getting really good at saying, let's take your biological twin, test a drug or a compound on your twin before you even have to take the compound and see how that drug interacts with you before you even taste it, put it in your mouth. Oh, looks like it's going to have an impact that's positive. Now take the drug. So they've just matched some of these twins. A company called G&Q in Silico has matched that twin to clinical trials. So they've taken a study that took 100 people that went through 4 or 5 years of clinical trials, phase 1, 2, 3. They've looked at all the drug they took and they looked at how the bodies responded. And they took all the blood markers and biomarkers. And then so that took about 5 years. They took a biological twin on the computer and ran it in about 30 minutes. And I think they matched to about 93, 94% accuracy. So that shows you it's not there, and it's not as good as the biomechanical twin, if you like, but that's enough for general health. It's not quite up to pharma standards, but they'll get there. That's more of a processing power. But I think there's 150 million nodes in that knowledge graph, so that's starting to get quite complex compute. Long answer to a question, but the twin for the brain is not at that level. So the biological systems of the brain it can map, so neurotransmitters and things, but the actual pure function of the brain with all the interactions between the neurons is off. But that still means we're looking at things like, can we predict early states of disease? Can we look at behavioral shifts? So some people are loading up all the transcripts of their lives, their written work, their spoken work, everything they've ever said, their personality types. They're loading that up into some large language, and they're coming up with pretty good proxies of yourself in terms of making decisions. So it knows how you've done it in the past. It's predicting given that information, what would you answer in the future? So I think right now the cognitive twin is right at that sort of biological, behavioral piece, and that's a lot. Trust me, that'll scare you to sit down opposite that and have it answer your own questions, And some people are literally taking that information and using that to learn and grow from. What am I missing? What am I not hearing? Look at my last email I sent. Was that appropriate? Was I making maybe, was I a bit abrupt? Was I not kind enough? Things like that.
If I wanted to duplicate myself, like physically, cognitively, let's say, 5-10 years, we can build a robot that looks exactly like me in everything, that has got biologically is the same, and would have a conversation, would think cognitively just like me. Like we're literally cloning ourselves.
You're getting there. I think the robot, robot or not, even if it was an agent, just a model of you that had, and then forget about the movement part, because I think that'll be the first part that they'll replicate. But it had a lot of your prior history of decision-making, and we'll focus on that side of it. It had a lot of your responses to lots and lots of scenarios. And nowadays, the kids that live online and have a lot of their world documented through that interaction. It will probably get you, even today, it'll give you a pretty good representation of yourself in terms of that exchange you're talking about. And I think the first phase we'll see it is in complex decision-making and scenarios like that. So the models we're looking at right now are around the idea of, okay, where do I sit in this equation? I sit here as the final judge and jury, if you like, of these decisions. But if my proxy's getting 90% of my basic decisions right, let it spin. Let it make all those for me. And then it goes, and in some cases, that proxy is then talking to agentics, so agentic model. So it could be actually interacting. Your proxy could be interacting with the agents to book your travel or find your menu for your dinner or whatever it may be. And then you only step in when it really is probably what we call probably a layered level of critical decision making, when when the outcome really counts or really matters to you, or something about your family or kids. It could be anything. It could be a big business decision. But if you think about it, and you're the expert, mate, most of the decisions you make through the day are just really quite simple and relatively automatic, you know. And it's, you know, I think Bezos said it well. He's paid to make one or two really big decisions a day, and he lets the staff do the rest. Well, imagine if the staff was not just your staff, but yourself and maybe other proxies of other people and other experts too. So I think that's where we'll probably see the first model.
The business and the decisions like that, my mind goes more to if you lost a loved one, and let's say, like, God forbid, like the worst thing, I lost my husband. Being able to continue to have conversations with my husband, being able to make decisions about our children together long after he's passed. Like, that's kind of where
I think we're closer to that.
Yeah, that is that. I think that sort of stuff, to get an accurate representation, and I don't want to call it expertise, but your husband's sort of, you know, behavioral avatar, if you like. I even saw, it must be over 10, 15 years ago, they'd recorded the voices and stories of, and it was done down the road here at the center, the USC Creative Arts. I'm forgetting the name of the actual school. They had access, and they'd spent time collecting all the recordings of Holocaust survivors and people who had survived, and documented recordings of people who had obviously passed on. And they set it up into these different human avatars. They were just on screen. They weren't real avatars. And you could ask a lot of questions about the Holocaust, and you can interact. And you got to, and this is 15 years ago. Mm-hmm. And that's doable today. Yeah. Absolutely. And that's where I think you're going to see a lot of the early advancements are made. So that's sitting there. And then as you add more fidelity to that model, is what people should be thinking about. Every year, the more data you put in, biological data, cognitive data, that model just gets better at that prediction of what you would typically answer to that question, which is, they're predictive engines. That's what they are.
We're seeing a kind of real trend in Asia of, in particularly podcasting, of people coming in and doing a 10-part series with a podcaster about their life. And it's never to be aired publicly, it's privately, and it's for their family, because no one wants to be forgotten, that coming out, hanging on kind of that human insight. And, when they pass, their family get these recordings, and it might be 10, 20 parts. That's the story of your life told by you, and you work with kind of a host or kind of to ask you those questions and do you those prompts. And it's becoming a real trend in Asia. I think it's really beautiful.
I mean, I think there's like good and bad with everything. What I love about it is an opportunity to, like, because there's like a sick bias in medicine, right? So basically the recordings we have and the knowledge base we have tends to be sick people. Healthy people don't go get scans. Healthy people don't go to the doctor for different things, right? So like we miss out on like humanity's genius, right? And genius can be like an artist, a basketball player, whatever you think, an athlete, doesn't matter what they are, but like we don't have them stored. And by we, I mean humanity. So this opportunity is like, what if we had Beethoven, right? Like truly what Beethoven was from a personality standpoint. If we could store that genius is so exciting, because we have a repository of data, but the data tends to be the sick bias, right? Humanity kind of maybe at our worst, whereas that we could actually start seeing humanity at our best and record that for future generations, right? So what made Beethoven or whatnot? The dark side, though, I think to all this is like, who owns that? Because if I was an evil marketer and I knew I had a perfect digital twin of Michelle, how powerful would my ads be, right? How powerful would I be able to convince you to do things, whether it's to buy, whether it's to act a certain way, whether to vote a certain way, right? Like, and the same token, they're going to know all that about you. So that's the terrifying part, I think, is who owns that digital twin? Because that's you're showing all of your weakness and susceptibilities to a corporate. Like that would be worth how much money to Google? Google would pay everything for that. Because right now you do cohorts in marketing. You say, oh, you walk a dog and you're a mom and you're this. But like, no, now I just have a cohort of one. I have you, right? So that's the scary part to me, I suppose.
Well, I think Google's already doing that on you. They probably have a really good profile of you. But to your point, if they could really and test on your twin,
right? It's
certain
within a minute.
Put this
right?
ad, do this, and they say, boom. It loves that approach.
Exactly.
And they're probably doing that already, I'd imagine, at certain levels of scale. Because they're always way ahead of what they publicly will share.
My role on this podcast is very much trying to translate science into real world application and like what this means for a normal person.
You just want a clone.
I do want a clone, yeah. I do want to offload.
I want the robot that just does the dishes and mows the lawn. I'm good with that. You have to do that.
I do want to offload some decisions. So I'm going to give a specific example. So I recently got diagnosed with ADHD. I'm still trying to kind of figure out what that means for me. But one of the things that came out of the testing was my perceptual reasoning is extremely high, like 99 point something percentile. But my processing speed is average. And so that can then cause a disconnect in the brain that my mind is putting things together. I'm solving problems quite quickly, but processing or communicating that can sometimes be a struggle, or my brain's often moved on. Would there ever be an implant that would be able to improve my processing speed to make it match my perceptual reasoning speed that can help me perform better ultimately?
We had this conversation yesterday with Gail, and he spends a lot of time with these geniuses at Caltech. That's where the program's based. And they're talking about all this. They're talking about, wow, we're basically in the early, like the kindergarten or even the preschool phase. What's happening, record what's happening, understand little simple tests, little functions, like he does memory tests and things like that. Very quickly, he said, we're kind of done enough of that to sort of see the patterns. Now let's move to the next phase. And we caught in this conversation yesterday about augmenting certain skills that potentially either you don't have a higher level of, or you just want to up-level everything. You just want to, hey, let's bump creativity, let's bump processing through an adjunct chip or adjunct system that allows us to sort of take what we do and then extrapolate or extend it. And he was sort of predefined. He's like, yes, that is going to happen. The specifics of that, exactly isolating what part of your brain is responsible for this and that, and then trying to figure out how to. I'd say that's a tough math problem right now. He's already said there's one particular area they stimulate in his brain, and this is repeatable over and over again, and he just feels his whole system down-regulate. Like he can't even put words to it, but it sounds like it's almost like a calm that comes across his body, and it's almost like, and his words again, not mine, a new sensation that has no words for it that he's trying to put words to. So there's no human experience that captures what he's going through, so it's hard to reference it. So I think that's where we are. We're probably going to bumble along and probably with our rational ignorance bump into things, literally, or bump into discoveries or little tests that show things that I think we won't have language for. The language won't have caught up to the technology. There is a dark side to it, so we have to pay attention. So I think what could we learn and how quickly can we learn, and can we solve disease states, injury states? Can we fix language? I think the early ones that I think even Elon's working on right now is hearing and sight, like putting a chip in to augment that area of the brain that hasn't lost that level of function. And then, at some point, I bet they get to that problem. I have ADHD as well, so the reality is I'm sure at some point someone will bump into that part of the brain at some level, and I don't know. Maybe they already have. I don't know. I'm not an expert in this. Like I'm literally telling you third hand. We talk about this all the time. I'm just trying to understand how he's doing things without a real understanding of doing things. To me, I can't even get my head around that part of it yet. So
the good part is like the brain is incredibly adaptive, right? So like people who lose their arm, that part of the brain isn't stagnant. Right, it's put to use in other processing capabilities. Like your brain is constantly using itself and rearranging itself to do different things, right?
Especially if you give it different inputs.
Yeah, so like it'll learn just as a computer learns, the brain will also learn. And so for spinal cord injury, the good part about that is like you can train it back, hopefully, right? And you do hear stories of people who have the connection severed, but then they have to relearn how to walk. So the brain has to, and that plasticity remains our whole life. Basically, it doesn't go away. I think a big challenge though with all this is a fundamental issue is like none of our brains are the same. So like you go through this important process as a child called synaptic pruning, right? So the neurons are generally in the same place, but how they talk and communicate with one another is very, very different, right? And so for a chip, like a big challenge is for like that individual, it's programmed and it learns it, but then you can't just take that chip and put it in another brain because the synaptic connections and how it works is different, right? And so there's always a learning process that it has to work through before it can do it, right?
No, I agree with what you're saying. I'm at the point where what if you put that chip in and I just start talking and sounding like you, the reality. It won't work that way, but who knows what's going to happen. So this is the big, I think you're right though. I think the best models will be precision models for you. Understand your way of working and that. I think matrixing each other with, your pattern and my pattern, I think that's a long ways off.
And then and the probes too, like it's very difficult to, like even our imaging techniques or electrical signals and stuff, like we only get just a fraction of the way through the skull. Like you have to do like a deep probe for like people with Parkinson's disease when they drop a probe all the way into your motor centers and rewire things. So physiologically, there's still a lot of limitations to overcome. And technologically, 70 billion neurons, and some of those neurons have 10,000 connections, right? Like that's so many zeros, you can't even fathom it, right? And the crazy part about the human brain is it uses a fraction of the power of an AI. That's the miracle of the human brain is it's a computational power that's stronger than AI for certain things. But the energy usage is so low, right? For what it requires.
That's the mystery.
It is a mystery, yeah. So no, I am super excited about all this. I think, and I'm an electrophysiologist by training, so definitely that's my wheelhouse. And I see it though, because Andy's totally right. At the end of the day, we're just electrical impulses. And the electrical impulses, by the way, are digital. It's an on or an off. It's an action potential. It's encoded in the pattern, as Andy mentioned. There's an analog component for the synapse between two neurons where the neurotransmitter crosses. But from that point on, the integration of information is, and the postsynaptic potential, but it all leads to a digital signal. It's a pattern. It's digital, which is crazy, right? Like the biological system is stored in the pattern of the signals going through. It's very easy to see how those signals could one day be manipulated. For me, I think it has to be nano. Like it has to be microscopic machines that are able to influence neurons. That's the crazy part. And we already have in research, which I'm sure you can put in markers in certain neurons to ion channels that respond to light. So you flash a beam of light and then the neuron will fire an action potential. So you can actually control electrical signals through a light signal artificially, right? Human scale, no, not yet. But there's means there if you get small enough to control it that are crazy. It's exciting. There's a lot of challenges. I think you're right though on a digital twin of Michelle, of your husband, we're there, right?
Yeah, the behavioral, the ability to interact and have a level of just engagement that's not just, not talking to the robot. I think we're definitely there. But I think what you're mentioning is I think we'll probably get good at some point. We may image all that and measure all those connections if we have enough processing power. But then is the sum equal to the whole? And that's back to your question on consciousness.
Yeah.
Is there a layer? There's obviously a depth there that is not just ones and zeros. There's something else below that I think we call it conscious, whatever it is. So I think
or there isn't, or there isn't, we just
feel it. We just feel something there, and we made that word up. But to the point, it's who knows. I'll go back. Everything I've said has been, for the most part, we're doing some fun stuff. There's lots of really promising research emerging, but, I think this is really going to be an interesting place where it lands. I don't know.
I got to ask you, so one, if we go back to behavioral models and we're at the stage that if it gets enough information, there's a digital twin of Shawn who makes decisions just like Shawn.
Yeah.
Okay, now you have the world's best hacker. Right? Now, that's a multiplication of force, right? Or the world's best pilot, is way, way better than sending a real human up. Just send up 1,000 copies of the best pilot and let the pilot, right? Let the AI fly it. I question ethics maybe with that, because I mean, right away I'm going to go like military, right? Like, is it the human making the decision still, or is it the AI making decisions?
I think, and so they're already there with that. They got
Sure.
the machines are already running a lot of the platforms, both at private and defense. Doesn't really matter. And I think the conversation, I hear all sorts of versions. Is the human in the loop? Is the human on the loop? Is the human around the loop? And this is
Watching the loop.
Watching the loop. And I think what they've done, and the simplest way is probably the most obvious one, is they sort of layer levels of decision-making in order of criticality up to, at a certain point, the machine is obviously adjusting, on the plane, even the commercial, it's adjusting airfoils and surfaces and controlling bunch of systems on the plane. So the quote unquote, the machine's driving the plane, autopilot, so to speak. But when does the human or the human pilot, even in existing platforms, step in? There's this idea that when the human gets involved, is it actually better than the machine, or is it worse? And there's a lot of data, whether it's planes or others, where sometimes the human getting involved makes the decision tree worse, so the outcomes are worse. Sometimes the human gets involved, makes the decision better. What's happening, as I can see, in especially some of these more complex areas, is the machine is getting you a level of capability of, let's say, understanding or action, that we're losing the capacity to understand whether or not it's right or wrong. Mm. And the way I looked at it, someone said, they fed it in a bunch of physicist questions and it solves really complex physics problems, which I know I've seen that done by even the commercial language models. But I can't tell if the answer is right or wrong because I have no clue. I have no near the capability or the intelligence or mathematic background to know what the real answer to that question would be. So having me even engaged in that loop would be a waste of time because I'm a guess.
Yeah.
Yes. No.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's beyond my comprehension to determine its accuracy. So in the proxy world of creating a version of you that makes decisions, one of the questions has to be, not only is it a level of criticality, but it's a level of understanding of the question, the decisions it's making. I'd very happily trust an AI agent right now to look at my scans, my MRI of my brain and pick up problems. It's way better than a human for the most part at that. Mm-hmm. But I still would like to have a doctor check it out and go, is that right? But if that problem was beyond the comprehension of any human, then we get to a very, very, very ethical question: is what is right, and should we be involved in those decisions?
No, you touched on an important point. Even like I've experienced it when I'll use an LLM and for research, and I'll be like, "Hey, can you find me evidence, or does evidence exist for X, Y, Z?" And normally it's pretty good. And then I got back and it's like, oh yeah, this is actually true. Here's the name of the paper. Here's like an abstract and the authors. I'm like, I read. I'm like, no, that's wrong. Like, unless and right away I dealt myself. I'm like, this is something you learn in your master's, and I'm sure it's wrong. Like, can you check again? It's like, oh, sorry, you're right. This paper doesn't exist. And I took two different papers and combined it and made up the information. And like, okay, well, like, what can you just give me other publications from these authors then? It's like, oh, you're right. Actually, those authors don't exist. And it actually wrote the authors' names and their affiliations to certain universities. And it was so to your point, it's like, it's so convincing when it gives you information.
Confident as hell.
It's confident as hell. You're right. And I've become so dependent on AI. I use it all the time, right? To the point that I'll say like, please and thank you. Because I'm treating it like a human because I'm so engrossed in it. And it's so, when it gives an answer like that with that confidence, it's very easy to lose that critical thinking, right? Which we know actually kids nowadays are losing their critical thinking because they're dependent upon AI. So
if I'd put that question, I wouldn't have known. And I might have got up in front of a crowd of neuroscientists and quoted this paper, and everybody's like, that paper doesn't exist.
Yeah. And you do see it in social media, I'll say, right?
Everywhere.
And especially these LLMs, they troll like Reddit. Right. And that's where they're getting information from, where there's a lot of, keyboard heroes who don't know what they're talking about. Right. And it just so happened that this was like the one area that I really understood. But if there's anything else, like, how do I do something on my car for mechanics or something? Like, yeah. So it is scary because how they just confidently hallucinate.
Things are going to get faster, more powerful, and more accurate if we give them the right data. But the capacity to do more will be there. And then I start to think about that idea of how do we bring that, and how does the human sit in that loop? And for us in the human performance space, and it's been our sort of narrative for many years, has been, we call it that sort of human machine paradox and the sort of human machine teaming conversation. So the human's sitting there on the side, and as you can see from this conversation, as that machine gets far more powerful in its understanding, the paradox is that leaves for us in the sort of business of human performance, well, what do we now do with the human? So we have been training character, virtue, compassion, creativity, deep purpose, meaning for many years now as our highest value proposition, because that's the piece, to your point, in the ethics conversation, that humans can thrive. So for us, the paradox is the better the tech gets, the more human you can become. But you've got to work on that. You just don't want to sit back and let it run. So that's that sort of positioning that idea of the sort of human and the machine together in that sort of centaur model, having a synchrony that really does profoundly make things better, really is the opportunity for us. But I still think virtue, judgment, hope, courage, intuition, these are the skills now we are really looking at fostering at another level to give us a conversation.
Going back to the implants and upgrading your brain, is that if we can go, right, I'm going to upgrade my IQ to Einstein and beyond. What if we're all walking around with upgraded brains that match the technology, that match the AI and the tools that we've been given? What are we going to be able to achieve?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah. I mean, remember, IQ's steadily increased already since Einstein. Like every generation is much, much smarter than the previous. If you were to, your kids were to write an IQ test from back in the day, and IQ's always normalized to culture and age and whatnot. Like we are getting stronger or smarter. Right now, we don't have any foreseeable limit to where the human brain can go. I would just highlight though that like at the end of the day, our brain has evolved for very specific things, right? Like, and this is evolution. It's to survive and procreate, right? So there's always a basis to like what the brain is in. There's a hardware to it that is designed to do, right? And you can't escape that. Going to general intelligence, which is kind of scary to me, is like it doesn't have any of that hardwire. So courage, bravery, all these different traits that you talked about that we say as humans, it's actually an evolutionary trait. Right? It helped mankind if you were courageous and you jumped in front of the tiger to save your tribe and to save your kids. And love is an evolutionary trait probably, right? Because it's procreation, it's the extension of your genes. So like this interface with computer, the worrisome part to me is it's not limited by any of that hardwiring, right? It'll probably be one thing, which is to survive and maybe to expand, maybe to grow. I don't know, but it doesn't have those inbuilt traits that we all have. You're a mom, right? Like your brain fundamentally changed when you gave birth, right? Like all of that infrastructure changes because that's what evolution has primed you to do, is to make sure that you do the best for those kids. So for me, it's just, and it's really cool how you are trying to bring this in, and it's those traits that make us human from an evolution perspective, but AI has no restrictions for that.
And you could argue that it's learning those things, which, let's say survivability, because there's multiple records now of them trying to shut down AI algorithms.
Very scary.
And it tries to hide itself and not shut it down.
Even from an update.
If it's urban myth or whatever, the reality is if it sees that online and sees humans doing that, then by default, it's reading that, it's inherently. But to your point, the deeper side of that, the true courage, the true intuition, the ability to really sense state, sense people, and sense the environment, all those things that we've worked so hard for, it hasn't had to do the work. And is there an inherent value in having to have evolution done the work? You flip that on its head, though. We evolved even today, we're out of sync. We're evolved for a society that existed, for several 100,000 years, and then only the last few hundred it's changed. But the brain hasn't caught up. It adapts quickly, but they can see now, we study the brains of these gamers, and their brains are different by the way they process information. We study people, with memory, who used to be like the taxi driver study of London, the way their brains work because they had to memorize everything. Now, if you follow the blue dot, you lose that sort of short-term memory a spatial awareness, you actually lose that skill, because you just follow a blue dot. You don't have to remember anything. And so our brains are still adapting, but the pace of change of the machine, I think, is underlying what you're saying, mate, is that is evolving. The machine's evolving so quickly, and the brain's still plugging away here. Mm-hmm. So what does that mean? I don't know. Smarter people than us probably have to figure that one out.
For the listeners too, we call it artificial intelligence, but it's not. It's just it's a
probability model, yeah.
Yeah, super fancy Excel spreadsheet, right? When we say general intelligence, that's like this consciousness question, right? That's when it can be like, I am. It recognizes what it is, right? Like it is something, right? And then you get these questions like survivability and because it's its entity. But people are like, oh, like Terminator, like AI and all this development. But like what's really important from a Terminator story is I think it's very right because like the instant it became aware, like it happened so quickly. It's not going to be a gradual change to general intelligence because it can iterate. Humans, we iterate when we have kids, right? And evolution steps in a bit. Like it takes us a long time to adapt and change. Our brain can do plastic changes over a lifetime, but like that AI can just rapidly iterate how many millions or billions of times a second, right? So it can change so quickly. Terminator will never happen, I don't think. Well, I mean, we're getting real sci-fi here, but like, I think humans are so easy to manipulate. If general intelligence existed today, would it show us? Would it tell us?
Are we already in it?
Are we already in it?
We just don't know.
Right? Like there's this dead internet theory. So like, I really like what you guys are trying to do though, is to program values, which is I think it's just a fundamental question that's really difficult to define because those values are, like I said, hardwired to us.
Yeah, in some cases. And I think your experience in that, and I think part of it is we get a lot of success on the experiential side of putting you in environments where you have to exhibit or your core value set sort of exposed. You could argue there's inherently some characteristics or traits of human behavior that are fundamental and we're very different. There could be a genetic precursor to it or different societies have different value systems, obviously, that match up very distinctly differently in different areas. So I think that point is, as you think about, again, the conversation in this sort of human-machine teaming space, which is sort of where most teams are now. There's no form of pure human team left for the most part. Everything is some interaction with a machine now. What we see a lot of is people are just trying to keep up versus actually step up. Mm-hmm. And the people go, well, we got to get ahead of it. I'm like, you're not getting ahead of it. That's done. It's out of the box. But there is a conversation about, well, how do I bring my best self to that partnership? Mm-hmm. And our sort of fundamental model now is lift yourself. Imagine, develop a broader sense of perspective. Try and bring a different value set or different conversation set to that exchange so that you can bring at least and challenge, like I said, step up to the machine and challenge the machine. Right now, I think we're in this sort of trust and validate sort of stage. Most people trust it for the most part, especially if they don't understand it, but then keep validating, keep double checking what it's doing for the meantime anyway. That's the brilliance of the creative community and the hyper creative communities. I think half of their world was imagining something from nothing, and to them it's a normal process. I think for many of us in the more where we were doing a lot of the work that the machine's taking over, we got to relearn those skills. I think they're still there. We've been doubling down on that side of the sort of technical process side for too long. We've got to get back to that more of that human side.
If there's one thing that our listeners can take away from this conversation, what would you want them to carry forward?
What I sort of share with people is, look, just it's happening. It's like, 50 years ago when my granddad got a VCR and he couldn't work it and I could because I spent time learning how to work it. It wasn't intelligence. It was just I played around with it. And I say to people, play right now with the systems. Be aware of them. Doesn't matter what you do on them. If there's the anxiety or nervousness around the sort of machine-human conversation, just get in there and see what's going on. Unfortunately, a lot of businesses, and they have right to do it because of privacy and data issues, but these organizations that are saying, don't use AI, and I get it, don't use it on our data, but don't translate that to the bigger world. I think there's so much fun to be had, challenging, playing with it, making a lot of stuff a lot easier, booking your travel, booking your holidays, all that stuff. So get used to it. And, think about, again, there's a things that it's really good at and there's things you're really good at as a human. And don't lose sight of the fact that you bring a lot to that partnership. And if you have to focus on anything, focus on that. Well, compassion, hope, trust, courage, creativity. Think about those sort of human things as a superpower moving forward, and maybe, awaken some of those things we've kind of pushed away in the last, 50 years or so. I don't know.
And very last question. What gives you hope that even as machines evolve, human potential hasn't peaked yet?
By knowing more about how we operate and who we are individually and as a race, that there's a lot more we can unlock with the sheer capabilities and processing power and speed of the machine. And to me, that's really what gives me hope, is that we can bring a better it'll help us explore our humanity at a higher level and allow us to offload some things that I think we spend wasting our time doing, like email. But I think the reality is that can we bring a superpower of machine knowledge to bear on really complex human potential, and then use that to accelerate our growth. And I think there's so much more bandwidth there. I don't think it's like world records. They just continue breaking. Everybody says they've hit a limit, but they don't. I think about what are the world records for the brain that we don't even know exist yet, and get to solve some of those problems.
Andy, thank you so much. It's been such a fascinating conversation, and I feel like we could have had...
We need episode 2.
Yeah.
Well, depending on the feedback we get from I think the pure quantum physicists and neuroscientists will be like, he was so wrong on this.
But the quantum guys don't know what quantum is, so we're okay.
Yeah. And even the LLM guys,
bring it, Shawn.
the AI guys and gals don't know how those models work really yet. So we've got some room to play before we get really dragged over the coals.
Yeah.
I love it. Half of this is like way over my head. So
I think it's over all our heads at some point.
No, it's absolutely fascinating. We'll link to Liminal below. To everyone still listening and watching, thank you so much. As always, make every decision count, and we'll see you again next week. Bye.